We don't have any interest. Order, order. Good morning and welcome. We're very grateful to you for coming in to help us with the work we're doing on prison planning and policies. And we have with us this morning Angela Levin, formerly chair of the Wormwood Scrubs Independent Monitoring Board. Good morning.
Morning.
Jonathan Robinson, who's a former prisoner and has written extensively. Welcome.
Good morning.
Paula Harriott, head of programs for User Voice. Welcome. And Deborah Russo, joint managing solicitor for the Prisoners Advice Service. Welcome to you too.
Also the unavailability of courses and the lack of education, with A4E pulling out of a £17 million contract to deliver training and education in 12 London-based prisons.
Starting off with, I just want to be totally clear that I fully deserved a too short prison sentence in 2011. I was sentenced to 15 months for theft. So this was before the cuts. I fully deserved a prison sentence. What I saw going on in prison, or not going on in prison, is, I believe, part of the problem of the whole mess. When you're actually, quite justifiably, at the coalface, in the trenches, I found a prison officer asleep on duty on 2 occasions at HMP Bedford, which later transpired to be the prison with the highest suicide rate in England and Wales at the time. The stuff going on, or not going on, is the real root of the problem, including, as I shall be revealing later, in-house sabotage of rehabilitation. There are some very good prison officers. There are also, from my experience, some awful ones. Prison officers in this country are trained for somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks. In Norway it's 3 years. From my experience, the majority of officers saw themselves in a position of key handlers and not rehabilitators. That culture needs to change.
Mr. Corbyn just wants to come in on that.
I think Mr. Robinson what he just said.
Jonathan.
Jonathan, welcome. Thanks for coming along
Pleasure.
today. And thank
Pleasure.
you all of you. When you were there, were you able to have any serious conversations with prison officers about the nature of their work, how you and other inmates perceived them, and were they receptive to these kind of discussions?
Yes, I mean, believe you me, when you're allegedly intelligent and educated and you do something as daft as I did and end up in prison, the shock as to what wasn't going on was just life-changing for me. And I had many conversations with different officers in both of my prisons who were willing to engage, and the passionate ones were as frustrated as the chaos and Monty Python-esque stuff going on as were a lot of the prisoners who wanted to engage and crack on. The officers with passion who expressed vocally their issues talked about the frustration of the revolving door and seeing people leave the prison and come back. Throughout my whole prison journey, I saw missed opportunity after missed opportunity of fixing prisoners whilst they're in custody. It seems to me that a lot of recent reform has been focused on what prisoners call after sales, the probation journey, rather than what we could do with prisoners whilst we've got them in custody. I totally echo Paula's earlier comment that if you've got a good ship's captain and there's good morale in prison, that filters down to the staff and filters down to the prison. I go to a lot of prisons now as a guest, I hasten to add, to give talks, to try and give encouragement to, mostly to prisoners who are coming to the end of their journey. And I tend to have a sort of litmus test when I enter any prison, a bit like going into a new restaurant for the first time. I judge the atmosphere, judge how the interaction is between the staff. I was at a prison at the beginning of the summer where the governor knew all the prisoners' Christian names, and they were calling him by his Christian name, and there was a buzz in this prison. My goodness, I was impressed. Everyone seems to think I'm terribly negative about prisons. I'm not. If I see something good, I'll sing it from the rooftops. So I really do agree with Paula. If you've got a good ship's captain, you're halfway there. You really are. Staff with passion were, from my experience, as frustrated about the mess. And this was before this was in 2011, so goodness knows how they are now.
I think it's really critical. The staff-prisoner relationship is critical to reframe for continual prisoner consultation, integration, and actually sharing some of the decision making and building a sense that this is a community where some people live and a community where some people work, but a community that's got to work its problems out together.
And the key issue, of course, is that 99% of prisoners will at some point be let out to rejoin society.
Yeah.
And so what I've been going on and on about is let's try and do more with them whilst we've got them in custody. Yeah. And I've seen great stuff in public sector prisons and I've seen great stuff in private prisons. That from my experience in the prisons I've been into to talk at, there is no one nor t'other is ahead of the other. It depends on the governor. Mm. You've just asked what is impeding resettlements.
Yeah.
I'd like to give you an example. I'll start with a quote from the Prime Minister. In prison, you meet people who cannot read. They need help. It's common sense. I'm ashamed to say that before my fully justified prison sentence, I'd never heard of Toe by Toe or the Shannon Trust, which is a scheme via phonetics where literate prisoner A teaches illiterate prisoner B to read. I believe the figures for literacy in our prison population is something like 75% have the reading level of that of an 11-year-old. I was identified in my closed conditions prison as being intelligent and literate and trained to be a toe-by-toe mentor. Due to security issues before the cuts, I never got to tutor anyone in my closed conditions prison, quite simply because there was no one on my wing who needed the help. There were I was told, plenty of prisoners on other wings who could do with help, but due to then staff shortage, I was unable to tutor. But I was moved very early into my prison sentence to an open resettlement prison called HMP Holsey Bay in Suffolk. And on my first full day, was identified as the only trained toe-by-toe mentor on site and asked if I would be willing to teach 2 illiterate adult prisoners to read. And I then and now was so ashamed of my behaviour and so eager to put something back in and do something purposeful and constructive. And so I eagerly consented. I met the 2 prisoners who wanted me to teach them to read. I set up appointments with them. On the afternoon of September the 1st, 2011, I was summoned to the office of the then head of education, Mr. Kevin Morris, from a company called A4E, who were then being paid for their South East prison contracts education, providing £7.6 million. His exact words to me were, "Who told you to do toe by toe in this prison?" I told him the staff. "Those people have no power in this prison. There will be no toe by toe in this prison. Scrub the appointments." I, for the last 3 years, have been trying to air the vested interests in-house shooting down of a scheme championed by the Prime Minister, J.K. Rowling, Nick Hardwick. In my travels, I met the then Justice Director of A4E, a Miss Jen Byrne. In writing, she indicated that the company was finding it difficult to identify which member of staff I was talking about. A number of emails flew backwards and forwards. I eventually sent Miss Byrne a link to the A4E website which names the head of education. I haven't heard from the company since. With meetings with the MOJ, after they asked me lots of questions as to why prison doesn't work, they seemed primarily interested in the porn channels that were available at HMP Bedford. When I asked them what they were going to do about one of their service providers banning peer mentoring in an open resettlement prison, their response was, "We cannot comment on a specific incident."
Can I just make 2 points to Mr. Robinson? The first is that obviously we have to give someone who is named the opportunity to answer.
Please do.
Them, and we will do so. But secondly, I just wonder if I could ask you, what do you think the motive of A4E might have been to exclude this form of mentoring and teaching from the prison?
I have been, as I said a moment ago, independently working at prison reform and trying to reveal what's really not going on in prison. And I've met an awful lot of important people, some of whom are very scared to admit what's really going on because they've said to me they don't want to rock boats. But their opinion and my opinion is that because of the vested interests and all these different agencies working within prison who are wary of them doing the work so they can show the results. So come renegotiation time, they can say, look at all the certificates we've gained for this, look at all the people we've got off drugs, for example. Stepping on each other's toes. The vested interests within the system are part of the reason, from my experience, of the system per se shooting itself in the foot. Worse, that through the work I've been doing in trying to air what's not going on, the administration looks the other way or tries to ignore me. The MOJ very quietly announced on September the 11th of last year that toe by toe was to become mandatory in all prisons. I met in prison a great many prisoners who had done bad things, who deserved to be in prison, who deserved to be punished, who were full of talent. There's an army of enthusiastic prisoners wishing to engage who are shunned, and I'm just one tiny example. It's on the record that I had a meeting with the Shadow Justice Minister a month or so ago, and I said to him, in an open resettlement prison, we had no walls there, our boundaries were fields. If you've got someone there who used to strip down engines, get him to teach the youngsters how to strip down engines. As one of the panel was talking about that bounce-back engagement with staff, you start giving, especially young prisoners, you start giving them encouragements, some sort of older brother relationship, whether it's a prisoner who wishes to engage or a good officer. You see their faces beam, and many of these people have never had a father figure. I had to teach youngsters in my first prison how to make their beds. As it is, it's very wary of the prison issue because they see it as potential trouble. When I was still on licensed prisoner, my services were utilised by Guy Opperman MP, who wanted some feedback from me on prisons, who later promised me a reference so I could return to employment. He promised me this in writing, which was sent to the Civil Aviation Authority. I used to be a pilot. And his exact words to me, reference administration, was that all politicians are terrified of the Daily Mail and the prison issue is an election loser.
This committee is not terrified of any newspaper.
Well, incidentally, Mr. Opperman's promised reference was never forthcoming, and the Civil Aviation Authority in writing said that was spurious and grounded me.
I'm afraid that's another case where the committee will have to ask the person named if they wish to respond.
I would welcome it. Again, I was only in prison for 17 weeks, which in prison terms is a long weekend. I kept a prison diary, and everyone began to hear about that. And towards the end of my stay, I remember a prisoner coming to me and he said to me, Jonathan, will you use your influence to get some changes made? And I said, I don't have any influence. And he said, no, tell people what's going on. And to answer your question, to refer to an earlier comment, an easy 10% of floatable, immediate, overnight, rescuable cream of the top prisoners who, if they were given more encouragement, rehabilitation, education, whilst they're being punished, they want to engage. So from my experience, the most common complaint that I saw was not the food or anything else. It was just the missed opportunity. When you've got prisoners saying, what's going on here? Something's wrong.
Nor are they doing a full-time week, because I don't think, you know, a couple of days of an hour and a half each day is actually what any of us would call a full-time working week.
And the frustration of when you do sing this from the rooftops and say what really isn't going on in prison, the administration just say, oh no, we're making prisons places of hard work and rehabilitation. It's an inability of the system to say we have got one big problem. And the day an administration says we all agree it's not working, let's all hold our hands up and fix it. The administration needs to lose its veil of no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, which I believe ultimately is to keep certain newspapers happy because of this fear of elections. What they say is going on ain't going on. And when you're there and you see it and the madness and the waste, and you then get to meet Mr. Grayling and say, this is what happens. Oh, like Angela was just saying, oh, everyone's working hard. What's going on or not going on and what they say is going on are two different things.
You made the point, Jonathan, about the lack of training of prison officers. The POA indeed have made similar points to us. In a nutshell, each of you, what would be your priorities for training of, retraining of current prison officers, offering training, and of course training of new prison officers?
To answer your question, I was outside HMP Bedford yesterday for an interview, and they've got a notice on the wall advertising prison officer vacancies, and one of the strap lines was no academic qualifications required.
This committee has in the past lamented the shortness of prison officer training by comparison with almost every other developed country. Thank you very much to the four of you for the help you've given this morning. We appreciate it very much indeed. Order.
Thank you.
Welcome.